The Middle of the Pack podcast.
Welcome to episode 49 of the Middle of the Pack podcast. And this week we have the Middle of the Pack Mailbag, where we're going to answer some of the questions that you've emailed in to the show, and questions also that people have asked me along the way as I chat to them about the podcast. So there's going to be some podcast related questions, some running related questions, and all things that hopefully will motivate you to get on those shoes and head out on that long run that you were thinking about doing, or maybe thinking about not doing. So let's kick off today's show, and welcome to episode 49 of the Middle of the Pack podcast, the Middle of the Pack Mailbag edition. So the first question I'm going to tackle is someone asked me about why I started the Middle of the Pack podcast, and I kind of feel this one is a personal one. Well, really, the question wasn't why I started the Middle of the Pack podcast. The question was why I started the podcast in relation to, there are a lot of running podcasts out there. There are a lot of podcasts out there, and doing this on my own is tough on occasions. But the reason I did the podcast is the reason I named it the Middle of the Pack, because I love that phrase, middle of the pack, because to me it feels real, and to me it felt important that it's not all about the elite runners. It's about human. Running isn't reserved for the elites. It isn't reserved for the superhuman. It belongs to everyone, to people who run fast, to people who run slow, to people who stop for a breather, to people who are just trying to keep moving forward. And maybe that's the biggest lesson that running teaches us. Forward is forward. Some days it's a personal best, some days it's surviving the run, and some days it's just getting those shoes on. But it all counts. Every mile, every setback, every injury. And, when you get older like I am, they come maybe too often as well. But every comeback is all part of it, every finishing line. And, the fact that you're listening to this, I'm assuming that you're a runner or you're thinking about running. And I hope that it does encourage you to do something extraordinary, which is really to get out there and start running, to get out there and continue running. And you've set up this goal. You've committed to a goal. You will keep showing up once you get the bug that we've all got. You will keep going when it gets uncomfortable. You will keep going when you realize that you are middle of the pack or back of the pack. And it's great to get a medal at a race. It's great to get that personal best. But that's not the real achievement. It's the person that you become during the process. You become more disciplined. You become more resilient. You become more patient. Maybe even a little more hopeful. And that's why we do this. And that's why, in answer to the question, that's why I do this podcast. Not because it's easy, not because it's a joy to do this every week, because as with running, somewhere along the line, running reminds us that we're capable of more than we thought. And I wanted to bring that to you. And that's what the Middle of the Pack podcast will always be about. Ordinary people doing ordinary things, one run at a time. And that's why I do this podcast, and that's why hopefully you get benefit out of this podcast too. So that's the answer to question 1. One of the other questions we got was related to the marathon or a marathon, and it was, if you could give one piece of advice to someone training for their first marathon, what would it be? And I find, I was finding this a difficult one, because I think every marathon journey is your own. But there are some key things, and in the episode we had with Sean Lucy, he talked about keeping your easy runs easy and your long runs long. And in marathon training, well, that's certainly the case. And it depends always where you are. So I don't know, when the question is asked, what's my advice for someone training for their first marathon? There is a part of it being, well, what's your level? If you're going to be a sub-3 marathon runner, or if you're just out there for your own personal experience of completing a marathon, they're two different things. But for me, it's all about sticking to the plan. Hopefully you've got a coach. The coach will guide you on the running plan. The other big element for me is the nutritional side of things. So you're training your gut as well as training your legs. You're training your mind, your legs, and you're training your gut. Get your nutrition right, because that, for me, between Cork and Dublin, completed them both, but Dublin was far more comfortable for me because my nutrition, I thought and think at the time, was spot on. Now I mix gels and Alter Nutrition. I use Precision Gels and I use Alter Nutrition, and that's the formula that works for me. You need to find the formula that works for you in training for a marathon. So it is really all about getting the mix right between the leg training and the gut training, because it's definitely the biggest challenge in the marathon, getting that right. Because on race day, the limiting factor for a lot of runners isn't their fitness, it's whether they can absorb enough carbohydrate. Again, the gut training, the fluids, the gels you're taking on, and also, when I say fluids, not taking on too much water without giving yourself stomach issues. And I don't really want to go too much into that, because I think sometimes, that plays with our mind as well. But if you're aiming to run well while balancing quality sessions and long runs, you need to think about the training like this. Leg training builds aerobic fitness, strengthens muscles, and all the things that go with that, improves running economy, develops endurance. Gut training improves carbohydrate absorption, so you're doing it regularly. It reduces stomach distress because you're not trying anything new on the race day. It allows higher carbohydrate intake, and it maintains energy late in the race. When people talk about the wall, if you've got your fueling worked out, then energy and the mental strength stays with you at the end of the race and makes you stronger. But you don't need to train your gut every day. So easy runs under 60 minutes, just take water. Medium to long runs, 75 to 90 minutes, start practicing race nutrition occasionally. Long runs, 90 plus minutes, every one becomes a gut training session. So you got to make sure that that's what you're doing. Race pace workouts, practice exactly what you do on marathon day. So, but also there's an element of practicing eating while running, drinking while running, absorbing more carbohydrate is the important bit. But also there's an element of just practicing how you do it without, particularly if you're going for a pace. So is that one piece of advice? Am I answering the question? But for me, that was the thing that was really important. And even when you're going out on your long runs, eat breakfast as you're going to do on your race day. Take your first gel maybe even before you go out, because you might do that on race day. So every time you're going out on these long runs, particularly in the tail end of your marathon block, treat it like you would do on the race day. Even getting up the same time, if your race is going to start at 8:15, maybe try and even do your run around the same time. So the whole routine is something. So you're getting your routine trained out, you're getting your gut trained, you're getting your legs trained, and in doing all those things together, you're getting your mind trained. And the biggest mistake people do is that they train their legs hard, but they never practice fueling. They only take 1 or 2 gels during a 3-hour run, because either they're saving money or they're saving, I don't know what, but they don't treat it, they don't train like they will on a marathon day. Or the mistake that we hear people doing, they try a new strategy on race day. They try a new drink on race day. They pick up a Lucozade Sport where they've never had a Lucozade Sport on race day. And these are all the mistakes. Imagine training your legs to run a marathon, but only ever running 10 kilometers. That wouldn't make sense. The same applies to your gut. If you want it to be more comfortable, you need to expose your gut to the same intake that you would be exposing it to on a marathon day. So that's my piece of advice. I think I could do another episode on the podcast about this, because many runners obsess over carbon-plated shoes in interval sessions, but the marathon is often decided by two engines, the legs and the gut. Both need training. If you want to finish strongly, particularly over the last 10 kilometers, make sure you get your gut training spot on too. And that's my answer to question 2. So the next question, well, I'm not doing it in any particular order, but the next question, someone asked me what the biggest challenge is in producing a weekly podcast. I don't know if they're thinking about starting one themselves or they're just curious to know. But it's obviously, if you're interested in doing a podcast, it is a bit of work actually. And one of the things that I knew I'd be okay with would be the recording and editing. But one of the difficulties is, I suppose, finding guests, making sure that you have someone most weeks. We don't really need one every week, hence we can do this sort of thing. But it is an element of keeping within the theme of the podcast, coming up with fresh ideas, balancing my own training and work life and family life. And then the other nerve-wracking thing is wondering if anyone is actually listening particularly in the early days. Actually, I suppose at the beginning, I was kind of going, I wouldn't mind if I get 50 people to listen. And I think the first podcast, there was well over 100, and I was delighted with that. And then you get to do podcasts where you get to number 1 in the running podcasts on the Apple platform, which was really good. But yeah, I think that the challenge for me is really not necessarily finding guests, but remembering where you are in the flow of things. When you finish and publish the podcast on a Wednesday, it doesn't all just stop then, because you have to start thinking about doing the one for the next week. Maybe I was a bit ambitious doing it weekly, but I've got into a flow with it now, so it's kind of okay. And we have a good listenership, which is brilliant. I love seeing people all over the world. I mean, there's a good listenership in America, which always just kind of makes me wonder, why is that? Whether it's Irish connections or people like the accent, or there's a lot of middle of the pack runners that are finding it motivating and finding it helpful to their running journey. But yeah, so if anyone's listening and they want to be a guest or they think they have a story, just remember you can email me in at motpire@gmail.com. That's motpire@gmail.com. And then if you are new to the recording and editing game, there is a bit of work involved in that. So technically, an episode to record with someone takes about 40 minutes. So that's fine. And if everything goes to plan and it's a smooth enough recording, it's wanting to know what bits to cut out to fit it in within your 30 minutes. I know I could make the episodes longer, but I always said that I would keep it around 30-minute mark. If someone says something and that they regret and they message me back and so, listen, you really shouldn't I would appreciate if you took that bit out. All that takes a bit of time. So there is another possibly hour between producing the promotional social media. Yeah, so I think the whole thing probably does take up about 15 hours of my week, which isn't an awful lot, but it is an awful lot then if you have a bit of work to do, if you have family time, you've got your own training. So it's a juggling act, and that's the biggest challenge, but it is a very rewarding thing. I'm speaking to wonderful guests, and yeah, that really makes the whole podcast, as I said, a very rewarding one. We could try and get back to one of the running related questions now. Somebody sent in this question, which I thought was an interesting one. What's the biggest mistake you've ever made on race day? So let's just say back to the original question one, I think that you've balanced everything correctly. Your training has gone well. Now, race day obviously doesn't necessarily mean marathon. It means going out on a race day. And I'm normally quite consistent. I normally stick to the plan. If my coach Kieran McKeown says do ABC, I'll do my best to do ABC. If I can't do that, I'll often ask him, what adjustments can I make, and I'll stick to the plan B. So when it comes to race day, I have not necessarily a superstitious routine, but I've kind of got it worked out. But the biggest mistake came when I did my first evening race, and I think this went on for a bit, trying to get the kind of feeling that I would do on a morning race into an evening, because running a race in the evening, I've had breakfast, dinner, and then tea, or whatever you want to call the evening meal. Some people have breakfast, lunch, dinner, but the meal at 6 p.m., where we would normally have our biggest meal, trying to fit that in with, we'd say, an 8 o'clock race time or a 7:30 race time. And we went out to maybe 2 or 3 races in the evening, never feeling brilliant on the start line because we've had a dinner. And now I think the first mistake during that time was having a pasta dish. And yeah, it was probably good for carbohydrates, but it wasn't the best for having a full stomach on the start line. So now it's a simple adjustment, but maybe a help to everybody. We kind of basically went, well, what works in the morning? We get up, and an hour before we're due to race, we might have a cereal. So I've adjusted that into my race day strategy as well if I'm racing in the evening. So I get up, have breakfast as normal. Lunchtime, I will have a big pasta dish, maybe something substantial enough for afternoon coffee. And then at around 5:30, 6 o'clock, have a breakfast again. I normally have Cocoa Pops. And then just before the race, if I'm feeling a little peckish, I'll have a gel or a carbohydrate chew. And that made up, that definitely helps. And that's become now my evening race day strategy, and it works. Took about 2 or 3 goes to get it right. But if you're struggling with something like that, that was the solution for us. So we have breakfast, a good dinner at lunchtime, something not huge at coffee time, but maybe like a scone or something, and then cereal about an hour to an hour and a half before the kickoff time, the gun time, and then bringing gels. There's obvious mistakes that we've all made, like we've started too fast or we've gone too far back in the pack. But for me, when I was asked that question, I was going, that was the one thing that I've changed that's made a huge difference to my evening races. Race strategies you need to work out. Things like gels you need to work out. Overdressing, you might want to think about still wearing a race singlet. But yeah, everyone probably has a story with their biggest mistake. But for me, it was getting, again, related to the gut, again, related to nutrition. It was getting the dinner strategy wrong on a race day when the race is in the evening. Another question, and it kind of goes back to the last 2 episodes when we had Karen and Ian on. It says, what's the one running purchase you couldn't live without? And then they followed up by saying, and one that you wish you hadn't bought. Obviously, my running shoes, if you're listening to the episodes that we do with Ian O'Brien, Ian is really passionate about running shoes. I would be similar, but probably not as much as he would be. So I have shoes that I could say I couldn't live without. I do love my Adidas Pro 4s carbon plates. I love my Hyperboost Edge from Adidas as well. I do like. So yeah, I would say if there was one thing I didn't want to be cut out in my running journey, would be the running shoe addiction, shall we say. But then I have often forgotten my headphones for a race, and I've gone, oh jeepers, but I have survived. You think about the things you purchase: shoes, watches, headphones, running belts, shorts. What could I live without? Obviously, I need the clothing element. We did buy a heart rate monitor. Well, it was more for my wife, and ended up none of us ever used it because at our level, the watches really, that they do everything we need. We get all the information we need from them, really. In fact, I do love my Apple Watch. I've got an Apple Watch Ultra. I don't know if you listen to any of the running podcasts, they kind of always go between Chorus and Garmin. Apple never gets a run in, but I do like having the kind of, I suppose, a social media side of it, being able to play music, being able to play podcasts without having to download them to MP3s and upload them onto the watches. I like to do everything from my watch. And the Apple Watch Ultra has a very accurate GPS now. It has a battery life that is more than enough for marathons and lasts me the full day. It doesn't have a battery life like a Garmin or a Chorus, but certainly I just charge it up every morning. And as I say that now when I record it, I haven't done that yet. Yeah, so it's a very difficult question, but I mentioned it in the episode with Karen Toomey. I got a decathlon running belt, and it's almost like a piece of elastic that you can hold about 8 gels, two 250 ml flexible bottles, and the phone sits really comfortable in it. I nearly wear it all the time. You get some shorts that actually have built-in little pockets that you could put your phone in. I nearly still put this belt on. So that's a fabulous addition, and one that, not that I couldn't live without it, but again, it's great to have it. But yeah, I suppose if there was one thing that I would cut out of the, if someone said to me, you can't buy the one thing anymore, running shoes would be please don't take that away from me. I really do love the novelty and the thought process and that first wear, second wear. Yeah, it keeps my running life interesting. Another question, I thought it was interesting, if you could change one thing about the running world, what would it be? Very deep question. And yeah, I suppose even as you can hear me now, even though I've thought about these questions, I still think, what's the right answer? If there was one thing about the running world that I could change, what would it be? And I think it's not necessarily, I find the running community very welcoming. And I think it's not really, I don't know the answer how to do it, but as a beginner runner, there's a huge amount of intimidation. And even at my level, where I've been doing it for quite a while now, I'm hosting a podcast. I have connections across the running community. How do we still get rid of people that are intimidated by the running community? Because it's there. I suffer from it. I had imposter syndrome. I was really going, how am I going to justify turning up to a race when I'm not that fast? I could still ask myself the same question. But I realized that, yeah, I am welcome. And even in joining a club, it was the same thing. Am I going to be too slow? Am I not the right person? Am I good enough? All those things. But the running community is fabulous. And, if we did an episode there recently, and I forget the guest now, but they were saying really that everybody after a race, nobody asks really, how fast were you, or did you get it? People just say, how did you get on? And there's never a feeling of you weren't really up for it, really, or you're too slow, you shouldn't be with us. And actually, I remembered it was Mary Sweeney. She had said after the race, people are generally being sociable. People are generally interested in the cup of tea, sandwiches, the nice element, and nobody is judging anybody about their standard of running. And I think getting that message across, and I will probably repeat it as often as I can on this podcast, get that message across to as many people as you can, because that's the important thing that people need to realize. You might be intimidated about showing up to a park run even, But once you do, you'll realize that it's a great place, whether you're at the back of the pack, the middle of the pack, or the front of the pack. People love to see you there. I could go into the political side of things about race pricings. I could go into the thing about races starting on time. I could talk about social media comparisons and people that are posting false times. But for me, it's getting rid of the beginner intimidation, because I think that's so important. So if you're out there and you're thinking about, am I good enough? Am I ready? Maybe I shouldn't. Don't overthink it. I said that, Step 1 socks, they do singlets, that on the back of the yellow singlet, it says don't overthink it. And I think maybe we do that too often. Maybe we knock ourselves down a bit, because you are good enough. If you're running, you're going forward. If you're going forward, you're running. And that's what it's all about. Nobody says that you need to be a sub 3-hour marathon runner. No one says you need to be sub 20 in the 5K or in the park run. You just want to recognize that you are a runner, recognize that you're wearing a pair of runners, you're running with your friends. It can only get better if you get more consistency, but never feel intimidated about joining a club, going to the track, or running in a race. I can't believe I've got so many questions to get through. Maybe I just talk too much. But I did, and I am going to do another post about what the middle of the pack means to me. And we got so many different questions in that I haven't managed to cover them all. I don't like naming out people that have sent them in, but if you want to be mentioned, you can say, please mention me. But I think it keeps it more generic, keeps it more inclusive if I'm just asking the questions that were asked of me. Remember, being a middle of the pack runner isn't about where you finish, really. People have said to me before, maybe you should name it back of the pack, or maybe you should name it slightly ahead of the middle of the pack, because whatever. But I can go out on a Sunday morning with my club and I can be the slowest runner in that group. I can go out in the park run and I can be in the top half of the race and not in the middle of the pack. And I can go out with another group that I know and I can be the fastest one in that group. But it isn't about where I finish. Being middle of the pack is about the effort. It's about the journey. It's about the friendships and the courage to keep showing up. Around here, in the middle of the pack kind of ethos, we have a phrase, and Step 1 socks have a sock that says the same thing, that every pace has a place. And I think that's so important. And that's really what being in the middle of the pack and doing the middle of the pack is all about, is recognize that every person and every pace has a place in the running community. You've been listening to the Middle of the Pack podcast, Mailbag edition. This has been episode 49. We will do this on a regular basis, possibly every 4 to 6 weeks. So keep just sending in the questions and I will keep trying to produce the answers. But for this week, thanks for listening and keep on running.